Let me jump on affirmative action. You're a relatively diverse team, so are you saying I should give you 10 extra points because of affirmative action? Explore a little bit the question of whether you would want to get that and whether that's the right thing to do.
In the United States, affirmative action is aimed at helping minority groups that have been notoriously persecuted in the past. For example, African Americans and women. Today, we don't see it as much as we did in the past, but some students that are African American or that are women are not necessarily given a leg up, but are put in a position where they have a better chance of getting into a university or getting a job so that they can level the playing field and increase diversity in the workplace and education place.
I disagree. Although I think diversity is really a great thing, I believe that giving a leg up for wrongs done in the past isn't going to help the future.
Also, in the recent case Ricci v. DiStefano, a court decided that because of a test was thrown out that was taken by New Haven firefighters because not enough minorities scored well enough, that they ruled that this was racial discrimination.
So do you want my 10 points or not?
Please.
I'm going to get away from education and instead just sort of address sort of the social economic stratification that we see here in the United States. And most recently, there's studies that sort of show that the wealthier are getting wealthier and that the middle class and the lower class are actually increasing. Can you explain why that is if we've got such great opportunity and equality in the United States today?
We do have huge wealth disparities. The top 1% of the United States population has almost about 35% of the nation's wealth. And I think one main cause of this is private schools. I think that the wealthy are sending their kids to these schools and the money is going to these schools, therefore leaving the public schools with the middle or lower class with less money going into them. And so the kids that are being sent to these private schools are getting a better education than the kids at the public schools. So they're going to the better schools and they're getting the better jobs, therefore making more money. And as they make more money, they're going to continue this whole cycle is just going to continue.
However, with that, I do feel like pursuant to the passage of the 16th Amendment, which allowed the government to tax the states without apportionment to the state's population, equalized this wealth because it wasn't affecting the poor as much as it was the rich prior to it. Or prior to the passage of the amendment, it was having a negative effect on the poor. But now you can tax the rich proportional to how much they make.
Yep. Let's go back to your question of the private schools. So then you would advocate legislation which would say all children have to go to public school and no private school should be allowed?
I think that if we could implement some sort of program where the students are not attending the private schools, but they are attending public schools that will get them a good education, I think that could be extremely effective. Our school we go to a public school and we're all receiving a fabulous education. So I think that if we could get neighborhoods to be a diverse population of lower to upper class, where the upper class could contribute more money, I think that they could have just as good of an education as they would be receiving at a private school, and all of the kids would be getting an equal opportunity.
However, of course, legislation that would force people to go to public schools would be unconstitutional due to the decision in Pierce versus Society of Sisters.
I guess then just to go on that frame of thought, I mean, to what ends? I mean, how much should government be involved in that situation?
Well, going back to what Tocqueville thought that the federal government should not play a role in local governments. He thought that the local governments were the best way of helping their citizens because they knew what the citizens wanted. Because you'd walk down the street and you'd be able to talk to your congressman or your representative from your town.
So under the principle of subsidiarity, which is where if a local government can solve a problem, the national government really shouldn't butt into their business. So that's why I think local governments should be running schools and figuring out how to make the education system better versus the national government.
But I'd argue that now we need a much larger national government as opposed to the time when Tocqueville was around. For example, as we see up in our northern neighbor Canada, their healthcare system is ailing, there are long waiting lines, and there's not sufficient funding, and that's partially because the healthcare system is run by their provinces as opposed to the national government, as it is done in France, where they have the greatest healthcare system in the world. So I'd argue that the national government should take a larger role now that we have a greater need for it.
We've heard a lot recently about the Tea Party and other Tea Party activities. Think a little bit about the Tea Party activities and from a constitutional perspective or from Tocqueville's perspective. Should we be encouraging them? Should we be ignoring them? Or should we be condemning them?
When it comes to Tocqueville's perspective, he would definitely be supportive of this Tea Party movement because of their feeling of being oppressed by this big federal government. So in Tocqueville's time, he thought that even state governments were too big, and that, or back in Tocqueville's time, he felt that the federal government was weaker than it is today because it has grown majorly. And so the state government was even being oppressing the local, or could possibly create a tyranny of the majority and oppressing the local governments. So I think with this, federal government being oppressing, having these Tea Party, these members of the Tea Party being oppressed by the federal government, he would be very disappointed. So he would be supporting this movement.
Looking at the constitutionality of the Tea Party movement, I think that they definitely go along with the constitutional requirements. And they, under the First Amendment, they have freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. And the Tea Party members are assembling together and saying and professing their views. And I think that this is very constitutional and just what the framers would have wanted.
I would disagree, however, with the Tea Party's idea that the federal government should not require people to have health care. As I mentioned, the principle of subsidiarity of how local governments should be able to solve their own problems. Local governments cannot always provide health care for their constituents, and so I think it's better that the federal government should intervene and say, okay, hey, listen, we have a problem, and this is how we're going to fix it.